Hey, what's going on, guys? I am Pride from milkandcookiesTW, and Total War 3 Kingdoms has been out for almost 2 months now. It is a really good game. Campaign itself is one of the best in the history of the franchise, deep and complex and nuanced, with massively improved diplomacy, and a lot of content on offer. It's been lauded across the interwebs from critics to Steam reviews as the finest campaign yet, and with good reason. It has a very good chance of becoming the best-selling Total War game of all time. But the multiplayer is a mess. It is a mess right now. There's no other way to put it. I held off making this video because I wanted to give CA a chance to fix some of this stuff because it was such a good release in so many other facets, but 2 months later, these launch day issues are still hanging around like a stale fart. If you're wondering why a lot of the biggest Total War content creators on YouTube are avoiding covering the multiplayer portion of the game, even though multiplayer is the bread and butter of many of our channels, it's because it's not very good. It's just not in a good spot right now. In fact, I'm not sure if I've ever seen multiplayer belly flop dead on arrival quite like 3K has. Even Total War Attila's multiplayer community lasted longer. And here are a bunch of the reasons why. For one, romance mode is horrifically balanced at the moment. It's currently home to some of the silliest shenanigans I have ever seen in the history of this series, which is crazy when you consider machine gun matchlocks from Shogun 2, or poison arrows and Tagmata cavalry from Attila, or the holy crap facta of Buna, Spirit Leech, and magic missile lord sniping at the outset of Warhammer 1. There are some hilariously broken combinations of heroes in multiplayer. Now, I think we can all agree in romance mode heroes should be powerful. It's an incredibly important aspect of oral and written tradition from this time period in general, and from the romance novel. Legendary warriors and peerless tacticians who could move heaven and earth to defeat their enemies. But while it's awesome to see Lu Bu carve his way through hundreds of soldiers, there obviously has to be some limits to that, or the battles themselves become kinda pointless. It's not very tactical or interesting to run a general into the middle of an enemy blob and auto-win from there. I mean, when historical figures from ancient China start making avatars of literal gods and demons who can blow up mountain ranges in a fantasy setting look like pussies, then maybe, just maybe, it's time to scale things back a notch or 3. I'm not sure how it made it past QA in the first place, but you can pick the same warlord 3 times in the same army. Begun the Clone Wars have, and this is a huge problem plaguing 3K multiplayer right now, because a really common tactic is to bring 3 of the same ungodly overpowered lord and just win, because regular troops have absolutely zero hope of actually touching them. Shu Cho is a prime example. This is the guy with the worst design in the history of Dynasty Warriors. Just saying a lot in a series with hermaphrodite Wolverine and a big titty anime waifus across the board, but despite looking much more grounded in 3K, he might just be the most OP unit in the entirety of the game. He can increase his melee damage and armor piercing by 900% when he drops below 50% health, and has a 50% ward save that he grants to all nearby generals as well. That's incoming damage from all sources he cuts in half. So a really common tactic is to bring 3 of him and just run after enemy characters. He's so incredibly tanky, has so much mass, and does so much damage that when you finally get him below half HP, he can basically ignore enemy armies anyway and bulldoze right through to the enemy hero and slay them in seconds. I did some testing with him, and in a battle where I had almost a 15,000 funds disadvantage. 15,000! That's double the amount of a regular large army setup, as in I spent 4,500 gold on 3 maxed Shu Chos, and I didn't bring any other unit, and the enemy army spent 18,000. I won a battle without microing at all. Only thing I did was hit attack orders at the start of the game and activate his condemned howl when he hit the HP threshold. Mr. Triple Threat did the rest. That kind of stuff does not even remotely work in Warhammer. You aren't going to see Lord Skrulk or Mazdamundi or Malekith plunge into an enemy army by themselves in multiplayer and live to tell about it. But here, it's actually viable with some characters. On the topic of Lord Sniping, a super fun tactic right now is to have 2 or 3 Sun Rens Vanguard deploy right in front of an enemy deployment zone and use Heartseeker on their characters right at the start of the game. If it's an open map, say goodbye to your generals. I've seen games where warlords die in the first 5 seconds to those kind of sniping abilities. And if they don't, it's only on a 15-second cooldown and it can do up to 10k damage on a lord. So you can just use it again 15 seconds later and they're going to die to it. You can combine 2 of those Sun Rens with 1 Sun Tzu and his massive AoE minus 50 morale debuff that lasts for the entire game. You can snipe out the enemy general, hit that roar on Sun Tzu, and watch as most infantry units on the field run for the hills immediately, with their leadership permanently cut in half. Honestly, that kind of stuff reminds me of the Magic Missile Lord sniping meta at the beginning of Warhammer 1, which I think everyone can agree was absolutely garbage and made for really unpleasant battles to play and watch. Probably one of the biggest issues with characters right now is that they have almost unlimited mass. So not only are they incredibly strong with overpowered abilities, but they ride through enemy units like they don't even exist. You can have brace units in deep formations, and they'll just charge right through like they aren't even there. Get into your backline with 0 effort, and just start murdering your backline, your archers, or your characters. So good positioning often doesn't matter that much. They can kind of just run through, and it just comes down to whichever side's characters come out on top. The other problem is that a lot of the characters, in fact most of them, aren't even viable. There are only a handful of godlike heroes that are super incredibly good, and that make everyone else look like idiots, and you're at a massive disadvantage if you choose not to bring them. There is obviously no reason you should be able to bring more than 1 of the same general in battle. It doesn't make any sense. There has always been a cap on characters like that in previous games. Even back in the Shogun 2 days from a decade ago. Try taking multiple Waiseki Kenshins or Oda Nobunaga's and the game will not let you. But even if and when this gets fixed, it won't actually fix the crux of the issue. That the top tier warlords in 3K make even 30-foot tall treemen ancients and T-Rex riding velociraptors look like weaklings. That they have free reign on the battlefield, can run through enemy formations with impunity, and generally do whatever the hell they want. It makes regular units feel pointless. It just doesn't make for very tactical or interesting battles. There needs to be a huge balance pass on characters to bring the horrendous characters up to speed with the godlike ones, or hopefully find some middle ground where the best can't take on entire armies by themselves. If 3 Shuchos killing an entire army is CA's vision for romance mode, then okay. It's not my thing, and I definitely won't play it, but at least I can respect the choice. What's not okay, though, is then to leave 90% of the cast in the dust as absolutely terrible, horrendous choices that no one in their right mind would ever use because the other top 10% are just so damn good. Now, naturally, you'd think shifting to records mode would be the solution, right? That's where the grounded and more realistic battles take place, and was one of the biggest selling points of the game, being able to choose between over-the-top romance mode and a more historical records experience. Unfortunately, this isn't really doable. There is no ranked records mode. If you want to play ranked battles, the only option you have is romance, a game mode that is clearly not designed for ranked play in any way, shape, or form. But more than that, the romance issues don't only exist in romance mode, they're in records too. Have you ever heard the expression, fire so thick you could walk on it to the LZ? I think this is taking that a bit too literally. This is from records mode, the grounded, historical game mode. There are no abilities being used here whatsoever. These are normal Furia Beihai crossbowmen firing Thompson submachine guns. Their second volley is in the air before the first one hits. All you gotta do is give them some chevrons and watch the fireworks. They will delete any unit in the game, doesn't matter how much armor you have, because they're crossbows, they're AP. Again, I think we can all agree stuff like this should not exist in the historical battle game mode. One of the design issues I have in records mode, though, is that you have no real options in terms of how your generals fight. They all default to heavy cav, so no matter what, no matter how you want to play, you will always have 3 very strong cavalry bodyguard units on the field. And so from the outset of a match, you're locked into bringing lots of anti-cav tools, because if you don't, they're going to completely run over your army. So in a game that's already severely lacking in faction unit variety, you're even more railroaded in how you play on the battlefield itself. I think the game would benefit tremendously from giving players options on what kind of unit they want to place their warlords into, or at the very least, separating them so that characters famous for their archery would be in extremely good archer regiments. Infantry characters would roll with heavy infantry, and so on. But this would also require additional balancing for cavalry in general, because right now, their mass and cycle charging is incredibly strong, almost Attila style, where you can cycle charge over and over and take minimal damage when pulling out of a unit. There needs to be actual reasons to bring generals that aren't on horseback. Otherwise, they'll just be the go-to every single time, and any of those infantry or archer commanders will be useless. That's not how you design a good multiplayer game. Now, clearly there's a lack of faction variety and unit diversity in general. We kind of knew this was the deal going in, so I'm not going to harp on that too much. But honestly, there is way more to this time period from a unit perspective than what we've seen so far. I think a lot more could be done on that front to liven up the battlefield. We've already seen modders tackle that. I think CA needs to do so as well. And while I can forgive the general lack of faction variety in a game set in China, the lack of avatar conquest is a severe sore spot for me when this would have been the perfect setting to see it return. An army painter, some additional customization options, retainers, and veteran units with a progression system just works in a homogeneous Total War game, as Shogun 2 proved almost a decade ago. To see that not return really sucks. There's also a lot of really weird behind-the-scenes stat stuff that gets very confusing to understand and makes it hard to learn the game and gather information during battle. For one, when you pair units with specific lords, the stats of those units are changed, sometimes dramatically, even in records mode. So for example, Kong Rong massively increases ammo capacity for archers and crossbowmen, and Sun Jian massively increases their reload and fire rate, but the game doesn't really tell you this anywhere, despite it being really important information. This has a couple effects. For one, units don't perform exactly as you'd expect, as those machine gun crossbowmen can attest to, and it makes it really hard to test units in a vacuum because they have to be accompanied by a warlord who will passively change their output no matter what. I mean, even in records mode, you can easily get units up to attack and fire rates of 60, which means the only cap they have is how fast their animation plays. So for the units with super fast attack animations, you can see them fighting like it's Benny Hill theme, swinging their sword almost every second. And that's what we saw with the crossbows. They're firing once a second. With a crossbow, that is absolutely insane and should never happen. Where it gets even jankier though is the unit cards themselves, which may just be a personal thing for me, but I find them impossible to read in the middle of a battle. The problem is stuff like melee interval, charge bonus, AP, literally like 6 of the stats have a sword symbol. You've got a sword symbol swishing through the air downwards, and another going diagonally, another one vertically, and another one with a sword around it, and another one with a shield around it, 2 cross swords, and a sword and a shield, and like, there's no way to look at that at a glance in the heat of battle and know what's what. Having easily readable unit cards is especially important in a game where unit output can be so drastically affected just by bringing a warlord next to them, which you must have in your army no matter what. I'm really not sure how anyone could look at those unit cards or those stats and say it's a better design or more easily readable than the ones we have from literally any other Total War, where it clearly says armor, leadership, and melee defense, and spells it out for you like on the unit cards for Warhammer 2. Honestly, I could go on. There's the army losses penalty, which still kicks in way too early and auto-routes armies when they still have a chance to do something with the battle. There are unit balance problems like Sword Cav being almost entirely useless in their current form. Shot Cav does everything Sword Cav can, but better, except for taking arrows, which is a pretty dubious advantage for highly mobile units anyway, and so on and so forth. Even basic functionality, like being able to click on an ally's army to see their kill counts in the stat screen, doesn't work. You can only see the army of whoever is first player on each team. So in a 3v3, you can only see the stats for one player from each team. Like, what? How is that even a thing? How does that happen? It's very confusing. I don't understand it. It's a very minor thing, but on top of everything else, very frustrating to see that kind of thing. Again, Three Kingdoms is a really good game, and the campaign itself was done very, very well. But it is frustrating to see multiplayer in the state it's in right now because it feels half-assed and just forgotten about. And it was essentially dead on arrival on launch day because it doesn't seem like much effort was put into it in the first place. If you don't build it, people won't come. If you make it good, like Shogun 2's or Warhammer's is, people will play. And there will be a thriving multiplayer community as a result. But because they basically, it seems like not that much effort has been put into it, very few people are playing. I think there's like 1 or 2 tournaments going on every month, and that's about it. There's really not much of a scene for this at all. We've seen multiplayer thrive in Total War games where it's been given love. Again, Shogun 2, Warhammer, even Rome 2 had a long and successful multiplayer run, but here it has just belly flopped. Very few people are playing it, even fewer of the people who should be covering it are, and that's simply because it's not in a good spot. not from a point of replayability, not from a point of balance, and not from a point of fun. And that is very unfortunate. I'm a sad panda. Give us a reason to play.